There comes a moment in every person's life when they finally notice how much of their inner peace has been leaking away, drop by drop, without a sound. It usually happens during a quiet pause, when the noise fades just enough for you to hear your own mind again. And in that silence, you begin to realize something uncomfortable. Most of the restlessness you carry didn't come from life itself. It came from your attempts to control what was never yours to hold. Epictetus warned about this with almost painful clarity. He said that the root of human suffering lies in confusing what belongs to us with what doesn't. Yet we spend years pushing against the world as if it must bend to our timing, our expectations, our visions, our fears. And while doing that, we don't notice the peace slipping out of our hands. Almost 90% of the weight on your chest comes from battles you were never meant to fight. You notice it in the way you overthink someone's opinion, the way you replay old conversations, the way you analyze outcomes that never even happened. You notice it in your attempts to control what people think of you, how they show up, what they choose, how they feel, and where life leads them. Every time you grip tighter, you don't gain control. You lose calmness. The more you try to hold, the more life reminds you that certain things simply won't obey your command. Marcus Aurelius wrote that peace arrives when we stop arguing with reality. But most people don't stop. They keep pushing, keep forcing, keep shaping situations that were never theirs to manage in the first place. And the tragedy is that these efforts don't create certainty, they create exhaustion. You feel it in your body, the tension in your shoulders, the restlessness behind your eyes, the heaviness in your breath. You feel it when you wake up already tired, not because of what happened, but because of what you're still trying to control. There's a moment when this becomes painfully obvious, when you realize that all your predictions, expectations, and attempts to fix the uncontrollable have only built a prison inside your own chest. The walls are made of fear, the door is locked by attachment, and the key sits with acceptance, something the mind resists because surrender feels like losing. But as Seneca taught, we only lose what was never ours to keep. When you deeply look at this, you start understanding the psychology behind your struggles. It isn't that life is cruel, it's that your grip is too tight. You hold on to outcomes, people, plans, timelines, identities, and stories that were meant to flow, not freeze. And because you hold them so firmly, the natural movement of life feels like an attack, instead of a rhythm you can move with. Viktor Frankl said that between stimulus and response lies a space, and within that space is your freedom. But when you're trying to control everything, that space disappears. You don't respond, you react, you don't choose. You cling, you don't live, you resist. And your peace burns quietly in the background like a candle no one notices until the room goes dark. This is where the real journey begins, understanding that peace is not lost from the outside. It slips away from the inside every time you fight for ownership over things you were never meant to possess. The world doesn't steal your calmness. You trade it without realizing. This lesson is not meant to shame you. It's meant to awaken you. You cannot reclaim your peace until you see where you lost it. And you cannot see where you lost it until you're willing to ask yourself the most uncomfortable question of all: what am I desperately trying to control that isn't actually mine? When you finally start answering that honestly, something inside you begins to soften. The resistance lowers, the breath deepens, and the first crack of light enters the room of your mind again. You start noticing that the things troubling you the most aren't the events unfolding around you. They're the stories your mind is weaving around those events. And this is where Epictetus's teaching becomes almost painfully accurate. The disturbance never comes from the situation itself, but from the meanings you attach to it. The tighter you cling to those meanings, the more tangled your inner world becomes. And without realizing it, you try to control everything through those stories: people's reactions, the pace of your success, the direction of your relationships, the choices others make, the way the future should unfold. But life doesn't negotiate with your scripts. it moves in its own quiet, unstoppable way. You begin to see that the urge to control is often born from fear. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of losing someone, fear of failure, fear of uncertainty, fear of not being enough. These fears whisper that if you can just manage every detail, you'll finally feel safe. Yet the opposite happens. Your world becomes smaller, heavier, more demanding. You start living in a constant state of tension, as if you're carrying a fragile world on your shoulders. And the cruel irony is that the more you tighten your grip, the more life slips through your fingers. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself each morning that the world would behave according to its nature, not his preferences. He knew that expecting people to act exactly as you wish is a recipe for disappointment. And yet most of us operate with that expectation every day. We wait for someone to finally understand us the way we want, to love with the intensity we crave, to change at the speed we demand. And when they don't, we label it as pain, when in truth it is our invisible need for control that creates the ache. There is a quiet psychological cost to all of this. Your mind becomes restless, scattered, constantly analyzing possibilities that never materialize. Your emotional energy drains away trying to correct things that were never designed to align with your personal vision. You stop living in the present moment and start living in an imagined version of how the moment should be. And this distance between reality and your expectations becomes the birthplace of anxiety. Seneca once wrote that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, but the person who tries to control everything suffers twice, first in the mind, then again in the world. The tension never leaves because the world refuses to obey and the mind refuses to relax. You find yourself exhausted even when nothing has happened. You feel overwhelmed even on a quiet day. You chase reassurance, certainty, answers, closure, and none of it feels enough. Eventually you start to see how much of your peace has been sacrificed in this silent war against the unpredictable. You notice how drained you feel after trying to convince someone to see your perspective. You notice how disappointed you become when outcomes shift even slightly from your plan. You notice how uneasy you get when life slows down or speeds up without asking your permission. And in those moments, you begin to understand that what you called control was actually fear wearing a mask. But a deeper truth begins to emerge. The things that truly belong to you, your choices, your intentions, your values, your responses, never drain you. They ground you. They whisper clarity instead of fear. They offer stability instead of turbulence. And this is where the first glimpse of real freedom appears, because once you can separate what belongs to you from what does not, your entire relationship with life begins to shift. Something inside you loosens, something softens, something finally breathes. Gradually, a quiet realization begins to unfold within you. Peace has never been about perfect circumstances, predictable outcomes, or obedient people. Peace comes from alignment, an inner decision to stay rooted in what is yours and release what was never meant to be carried. This understanding doesn't arrive all at once. It forms slowly, like a dawn rising behind thick clouds. One day you simply notice that your suffering has a pattern, and that pattern always begins where control ends. When Epictetus spoke of freedom, he wasn't talking about freedom from responsibilities or obligations. He meant freedom from the chains you place on your own mind, chains forged from expectations, comparisons, imagined futures, and the need for life to behave according to your internal script. And once you start observing yourself honestly, you can see how deeply those chains have been wrapped around you for years. You've been trying to shape conversations so they don't hurt you, planning relationships so they don't disappoint you, rehearsing outcomes so they don't surprise you. But life refuses to be scripted, and people refuse to play roles you've written for them in your private imagination. This is where the inner conflict intensifies. Part of you longs for surrender, for letting go, for breathing again, but another part still clings, because letting go feels like losing control. and losing control feels like losing safety. Yet the strange, almost paradoxical truth is that you gain more stability in release than in resistance. When you stop fighting what you cannot change, your mind stops living in a battlefield, the noise quiets, the body softens, the breath deepens. You return to yourself. Viktor Frankl described this beautifully when he wrote that meaning is found not in controlling circumstances, but in choosing our stance toward them. You start to see that life's unpredictability does not threaten you. It simply invites you to respond with clarity instead of panic. And the more clearly you see this, the more you notice how much unnecessary suffering was rooted in your attempts to rearrange reality rather than reorganize your own heart. There is a moment, calm, almost sacred, when you recognize how many years were spent trying to persuade people to change, trying to force outcomes to align with your hopes, trying to correct every deviation from your plan. And you realize that not only did these efforts fail to bring peace, they pushed you further from yourself. You became anxious in the name of preparation, tense in the name of responsibility, controlling in the name of love, and exhausted in the name of survival. None of it gave you the comfort you were chasing. As this truth settles deeper, something profound begins to happen. You no longer feel the urge to argue with reality. You no longer feel the impulse to manage every response or decode every silence. You start recognizing what Marcus Aurelius meant when he said, "The nearer a man comes to a calm mind, the closer he is to strength." Calmness becomes a strength, not a luxury. Detachment becomes a wisdom, not a coldness. Acceptance becomes a doorway, not a defeat. And in that stillness you finally understand the essence of Stoic psychology. Peace does not disappear because life is difficult. Peace disappears because your attention drifts toward things you cannot command. When you bring that attention back, when you return your focus to your own actions, your own character, your own thoughts, peace comes home like a long-lost friend. This is where the shift begins. Not in the world, not in other people, not in circumstances, but in you. As you sit with these realizations, another layer opens, one that reveals how much of your suffering came not from the world, but from your resistance to it. You begin to notice the subtle ways you tighten inside whenever something unfolds differently from your expectations. It might be a plan falling apart, someone behaving unpredictably, or a moment not matching the image you carried in your mind. That inner tightening is the birthplace of stress. It is the body's whisper telling you that you're fighting what already is. Epictetus would say that peace arrives the moment you stop demanding the universe to follow your script. But this lesson takes time to truly sink in, because part of you still believes that controlling the external world is the only way to protect yourself. It's a belief born from childhood, from past wounds, from memories where things spun out of control and left you feeling helpless. So the mind tries to prevent that helplessness by gripping tightly, too tightly. And every time life moves differently, you experience that old fear again, disguised as irritation, anxiety, or disappointment. But slowly, through honest observation, you start to see this pattern for what it is. You recognize that your need for control wasn't strength, it was armor. Armor built to protect a heart that learned long ago that unpredictability can hurt. Yet, this same armor has become the very thing limiting your freedom, weighing you down, keeping you on high alert even when no danger exists. You start to ask yourself, what if I'm not protecting myself anymore? What if I'm only exhausting myself? Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that events are neutral until you bell them. And when you look at your own reactions, you see how often you labeled situations as threats simply because they slipped out of your hands. Losing control felt like losing identity, losing stability, losing dignity. But as the days pass and your self-awareness grows, you begin to understand that true stability comes from within, not from controlling outcomes, but from being prepared to meet them with strength and clarity. Seneca echoed this when he wrote that the wisest person is the one who remains the same in both calm seas and storms. And you begin to realize how far you drifted from this truth whenever you tried to shape every detail of the world around you. Your peace became conditional, only intact when life behaved exactly as you wished. But conditional peace is not peace at all. It is a fragile state dependent on circumstances you cannot govern. The moment this becomes clear, something inside you shifts. You stop treating unpredictability as a personal enemy. You stop interpreting every unexpected change as a disaster. You stop carrying the world as if it will fall apart without your constant supervision. You learn that the world has its own rhythm, and your task is not to control the rhythm but to find your steps within it. This shift brings a different kind of strength, quiet, grounded, steady. You don't react as quickly. You don't force outcomes as aggressively. You don't cling to people with the same fear of loss. Instead, you begin to show up from a place of calm authority, from a deeper understanding of what belongs to you and what doesn't. Viktor Frankl said that when you change the way you see a situation, the situation itself transforms. And as you look at your own life through this new lens, you realize how many moments would have felt lighter if you had simply allowed them to unfold without wrestling with them. You understand that peace is not a destination, but a discipline, a daily practice of letting go of what is outside your control and returning your focus to what is truly yours. Each day you do this, even slightly, you grow lighter, you grow clearer, you grow stronger, and for the first time in a long time you start to feel that deep, steady breath of freedom within your chest again. As this inner freedom begins taking shape, you become aware of how subtle the process truly is. Letting go isn't a dramatic moment. It's not a single decision or a sudden awakening. It's a slow, steady unlearning. It's noticing each time your mind drifts toward controlling something outside your reach and gently guiding it back. At first, this feels uncomfortable, almost foreign, because your mind is used to gripping. But slowly, you begin to see the beauty in loosening that grip. You start to observe the space that opens when you don't react immediately, when you don't rush to fix, when you don't chase answers that don't want to be found. That space feels strange, but it's also where peace hides. Epictetus often said that freedom is a matter of the mind, not the world. And you begin to realize that he wasn't pointing you toward passivity. He was guiding you toward mastery, the mastery of recognizing what is truly yours to command. The more honest you become with yourself, the more you see how many of your emotional wounds came from trying to manage what you couldn't. You remember moments where you held on to people longer than you should have, hoping they would become who you needed. You recall days where you stressed over outcomes you had no real influence over. You revisit times where you replayed conversations, trying to rewrite them in your head, even though the past could not be altered. All of this effort, it didn't bring clarity, it didn't bring comfort, it didn't bring peace. It only drained you. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the suffering you fear is often worse in your imagination than in reality. When you reflect deeply, you see how many sleepless nights were spent fighting shadows, not facts. You realize that the world didn't hurt you as much as your expectations did. People didn't always betray you. Your attachment to how they should behave created the pain. Life didn't always close doors on you. Your insistence on which doors must stay open caused the heartbreak. This understanding marks a turning point. You begin to view your patterns with compassion instead of judgment. You see a younger version of yourself inside these reactions, someone who just wanted safety, clarity, and stability, someone who tried to create predictability because unpredictability once caused pain. When you see this, your heart softens. The self-blame fades. You realize that even your controlling tendencies came from a place of self-protection, not weakness. Seneca spoke about the tranquility that arises when we stop allowing external events to shake our inner foundations. And as you reflect on your own journey, you start to understand what he meant. When your peace depends on the world behaving exactly as you prefer, it will always be unstable. But when your peace is rooted in your own clarity and calmness, it becomes unshakable, no matter how unpredictable life becomes. This is where Viktor Frankl's insight echoes with immense power. You may not control every event, but you absolutely control the meaning you give it. And as you slowly shift the meaning, from "this shouldn't be happening" to "this is simply what is happening," your emotional landscape changes. Reactions soften, anxiety loosens, fear shrinks. You begin to breathe in a way you haven't breathed in years. In this new understanding, you find yourself becoming more patient with uncertainty. You start trusting that not everything needs your supervision. You begin allowing others to be who they are without forcing them into versions of themselves that fit your desires. And most importantly, you start accepting yourself, the parts that feared loss, the parts that overthought, the parts that tried too hard. Acceptance becomes the gateway to transformation. And with each passing day, you notice a subtle but profound shift. Your peace is no longer fragile. It's no longer dependent on outcomes. It's no longer stolen by every change in the wind. It becomes something deeper, steadier, something that moves with you rather than away from you. As this clarity deepens, you begin to see your life with a wider perspective, one that stretches beyond the moment, beyond the emotion, beyond the immediate discomfort. You start recognizing a pattern woven through every struggle you faced. The pain wasn't in the event, it was in your attachment to how the event should have unfolded. This realization doesn't arrive sharply, it lands gently, like a truth you always knew but never fully acknowledged until now. Epictetus often reminded his students that the world assigns roles, and it's not your place to rewrite the script of others, only to perform your part with excellence. And when you reflect on the times you tried to shape someone's behavior, control their decisions, or guide their emotions, you see how much of your peace drained away in the process. You weren't losing battles out there, you were losing energy inside your own mind. There comes a moment when you stop fighting the truth. You accept that people will change when they choose to, not when you think they should. You accept that outcomes will unfold according to the laws of nature, not the deadlines of your expectations. You accept that the past cannot be rearranged to comfort you, and the future cannot be sculpted into a perfect image you can rely on. This acceptance doesn't make you passive, it makes you wise. Marcus Aurelius wrote that you should receive without pride, let go without attachment. You begin to understand that this is the heart of emotional freedom. Letting go is not abandoning responsibility, it's releasing illusions. It's freeing the mind from constant resistance, from the belief that reality must always match your wishes. When you step out of that belief, life stops feeling like a fight and becomes a flow. This shift touches your psychology in a profound way. The anxiety that once lived in the background, soft but constant, begins to fade. You aren't always scanning for threats because you finally understand that most of them existed only in your anticipation, not in your reality. You aren't always bracing for disappointment because you've stopped demanding perfection from the world. Your nervous system begins to heal from years of tension created by trying to control the uncontrollable. Seneca wrote that peace is found when the soul is at harmony with itself. You begin noticing what that harmony feels like. You wake up without the usual urgency. Your mind feels spacious, less cluttered. You don't replay conversations as often because you've stopped trying to manage how people interpret you. You don't chase closure from every situation because you accept that some things find their resolution in time, not in force. Viktor Frankl's words ring truer now than ever. You can endure almost anything when your inner world is steady. You realize that life was never asking you to predict every turn. It was asking you to trust yourself enough to handle whatever comes. And in that trust, fear loses its grip. Uncertainty stops feeling like danger, and starts feeling like possibility. You begin to notice a quiet confidence building within you, a confidence based not on control but on resilience, not on the world bending to your will, but on your ability to stay grounded regardless of what the world brings. This is the kind of strength the Stoics spent their lives cultivating, a strength that doesn't shout, doesn't boast, doesn't dominate. It's a strength that simply exists, steady and present, like a deep current beneath the surface of a river. And as you embody this, even slowly, a profound shift unfolds. You are no longer a prisoner of your expectations. You're no longer trapped in the exhausting pattern of managing things beyond your reach. You begin living in rhythm with life instead of wrestling with it. And for the first time, you feel what true internal peace actually tastes like: quiet, stable, unforced. With time, you begin to sense how much your inner world shifts when you stop placing yourself at the center of every uncontrollable moment. There's a quiet humility that rises when you accept that the universe does not revolve around your plans, your desires, or your fear of uncertainty. This humility isn't weakness, it's the foundation of true peace. The more you release your insistence on shaping everything, the clearer your mind becomes. And with that clarity, you begin to understand why Epictetus placed so much emphasis on the simple division between what is yours and what is not. You start to notice how often you used to take things personally that had nothing to do with you. A delay felt like disrespect. Silence felt like rejection. A change in someone's mood felt like something you caused. These reactions came from living with an unconscious belief that everything around you must bend to match your emotional comfort. But once you step out of this belief, the world stops feeling hostile. You begin to see that people's actions reflect their inner battles, not your worth. Life's unpredictability reflects natural cycles, not personal attacks. This realization alone brings a depth of calmness you didn't even know you were missing. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the mind should remain like a calm fortress, unshaken, unbothered, quietly anchored. And as you observe your thoughts, now you see that you're slowly building that fortress. Its walls are made of acceptance, its foundation is presence, and its strength lies in the fact that it no longer reacts to every wind that blows by. You're learning to let life move without needing to chase it, correct it, or control its direction. This does something profound to your emotional landscape. Your nervous system, once always on alert, finally begins to exhale. You're no longer bracing for outcomes. You're no longer scanning for signs of potential disappointment. You're no longer trying to predict the next twist in someone's behavior. This absence of mental tension feels like rediscovering a part of yourself that was buried under years of overthinking. Seneca once said that a person becomes unhappy when they allow themselves to be pulled in 1,000 directions by things that do not concern them. And as you reflect on your past, you see how true this is. You can remember moments where your mind raced because of arguments that weren't yours, timelines that weren't yours, expectations that weren't yours. You can recall days where your peace collapsed simply because you let external turbulence enter your inner space. But now, with a new understanding, you begin to recognize the importance of guarding your mental boundaries, of letting the world be the world, while you remain rooted in your own clarity. Viktor Frankl believed that the ultimate human freedom lies in choosing our inner attitude, even under the harshest circumstances. When you internalize this truth, you begin to reclaim a power you didn't know you possessed. The power to decide how deeply something enters your mind. The power to determine whether an event shapes you or merely passes through you. The power to stay steady, even when life moves unpredictably. This inner authority becomes the antidote to chaos. And slowly, through practice, you start experiencing a peace that isn't fragile anymore. It isn't shaken by every inconvenience. It isn't stolen by someone else's mood. It doesn't disappear when plans shift. Instead, it lives within you like a gentle flame, steady, warm, quietly alive. You're not fighting life anymore. You're moving with it. You're not clinging to certainty. You're meeting each moment with presence. This is the beginning of real inner liberation, and once you taste it, you can never go back. As this inner liberation strengthens, you begin experiencing moments that feel almost unfamiliar, moments where something once triggering passes by without disturbing you. A delay doesn't unsettle you. Someone's tone doesn't shake you. An unexpected shift in plans doesn't unravel your mood. In those small moments you realize something profound. The world hasn't changed. You have. Your relationship with uncertainty is no longer rooted in fear, but in understanding, and this understanding becomes the quiet pillar that supports your growing peace. You start noticing a subtle confidence emerging within you, a quiet assurance that doesn't need validation, applause, or constant certainty. This confidence is not loud. It doesn't need to prove anything. It's the confidence of someone who trusts themselves, someone who finally knows that even if life bends, breaks, rearranges, or surprises, they will remain steady. Epictetus believed that no one can truly harm you unless you allow their actions to govern your inner state. And now you finally see the truth in his words. When your mind is centered, the external world loses its power to disrupt your inner climate. This shift brings a different kind of emotional maturity. You stop expecting people to behave according to your boundaries, because you've learned to enforce those boundaries yourself. You stop demanding closure from every situation, because you've discovered that closure often comes from within, not from others. You stop searching for guarantees, because you finally understand that guarantees were never part of the human experience. What you gain instead is presence, and presence brings a clarity that planning and controlling never could. Marcus Aurelius once wrote that the universe is change and life is opinion. When you read these words today, they strike you differently. You see that your suffering wasn't caused by change. It was caused by the opinions, the interpretations, the mental stories you wrapped around that change. Letting go isn't about giving up. It's about freeing yourself from the imaginary narratives that suffocated your peace. And with every narrative you release, your mind becomes lighter, more spacious, more awake. Something beautiful begins happening in your relationships as well. When you stop trying to manage how others think, feel, or behave, you start connecting with them more genuinely. You stop performing. You stop pretending. You stop forcing conversations toward the reassurance you crave. Instead, you listen. You observe. You allow people to express who they truly are. And in that space, something remarkable happens. Authentic connection appears. The kind of connection that doesn't come from control, but from presence and acceptance. Seneca's wisdom echoes here. He who is brave is free. You begin to understand that the bravery he spoke of wasn't about dramatic acts. It was about the courage to stand in front of life without demanding that it change for your comfort. It was about the courage to face uncertainty with an open heart instead of a clenched mind. And with this courage, a new freedom awakens, a freedom from the constant psychological noise that once filled your days. Viktor Frankl's insight deepens this understanding. He said that between stimulus and response there is a space, and in that space lies your freedom. Now, you feel that space within you. You feel the moment where you could react impulsively, but choose not to. You feel the space where fear once lived, but has grown calm. You feel the space where old wounds once dictated your behavior, but now sit quietly, without control. That space is where you meet yourself, and meeting yourself is where transformation truly begins. As the layers of tension fall away, you notice a widening sense of inner stillness. Not emptiness, stillness, a fullness without noise, a quietness filled with strength. And in that quiet you realize something extraordinary. Peace was never lost. It was simply buried beneath years of trying to control what was never yours. Now that you've stopped fighting life, life has stopped fighting you. As this awareness settles into your bones, you begin to notice the subtle rhythms of life you had missed while trying to orchestrate everything. The wind doesn't ask for permission to move. The river doesn't wait for you to approve its course. The seasons shift without negotiation. And yet, each of these forces carries a quiet harmony, a sense of order that exists without your interference. You start realizing that life itself functions without resistance. Only the mind that insists on control suffers. Epictetus taught that understanding the boundary between what is yours and what is not is the gateway to tranquility. Now, with patience and reflection, you begin to see it everywhere. Your opinions, your intentions, your choices, and your actions, these belong to you. Everything else, the thoughts of others, the flow of events, the outcomes of situations, these are not yours to command. Accepting this boundary does not make life smaller, it makes your perception sharper. You start seeing clearly where your energy matters and where it is wasted. A sense of liberation grows as you stop fighting the invisible battles you created for yourself. Marcus Aurelius reminds us that the universe is indifferent. It is neither cruel nor kind. In understanding this, you let go of resentment and disappointment. You stop blaming life for failing to meet your expectations and begin to appreciate it for what it is, a constant unfolding movement that is impartial to desire. There is a strange relief in this impartiality. Without the burden of resentment, your mind begins to breathe. The psychological weight that once pressed on your chest starts to lighten. You see how much anxiety came from imagining worst-case scenarios, from overanalyzing motives, from rehearsing outcomes that may never happen. The constant mental rehearsal of life's what-ifs falls away. Seneca said that it is not events that disturb us, but our judgment of them. As you internalize this, the truth is undeniable. Your suffering has always been magnified by your attachment to outcomes that were never in your control. Viktor Frankl's insight becomes a guiding light here. Between stimulus and response lies freedom. You feel that freedom expanding inside you. You notice moments when you could react, but instead you pause. You feel a choice, a subtle power, to act from calm rather than anxiety, from understanding rather than fear. That choice is yours, always. Nothing outside can take it from you. And in this choice, peace is restored. Relationships begin to feel different too. You no longer seek to manipulate or control others to feel secure. Instead, you observe, you listen, you allow them to be themselves. This does not create distance, it creates authenticity. People respond not to pressure, but to presence. And in allowing life to unfold without forcing it, you encounter the richness of reality in its most unadorned form. Your mind becomes a sanctuary. The small anxieties that once felt overwhelming now appear trivial, like waves dissipating against a vast shore. You realize how much time was wasted gripping, calculating, correcting, and demanding, and with this realization gratitude emerges, not for the control you lacked, but for the peace you now have the courage to claim. Finally, you understand a profound paradox. The very act of trying to control life's uncontrollable steals your peace, yet the willingness to release it restores your power. It is a quiet revolution, internal and eternal. And as you stand in this calm, witnessing the world move without resistance, you glimpse the essence of Stoic wisdom. Life is to be met with clarity, courage, and acceptance, not with struggle and fear. In the quiet moments that follow, you begin to notice a shift in the way time itself feels. Where once your days were hurried and your thoughts relentless, now there is a rhythm that invites patience. You realize that so much of your previous tension came not from the events themselves, but from your desire to bend them to your will. The world does not move according to your timetable, and yet, in accepting its pace, you discover a kind of timelessness within yourself. Epictetus reminds us that it is not the world that disturbs us, but our judgments of it. As you live this truth, you begin to separate the external from the internal. A conversation that once would have provoked irritation now passes through without leaving residue. A plan that goes astray no longer becomes a source of despair. The awareness dawns that control is an illusion and that your energy is far more precious when invested in what truly belongs to you, your thoughts, your actions, your values. Marcus Aurelius writes of a mind that remains undisturbed amidst chaos. You start to recognize that peace is not something you wait for, it is something you cultivate. Every time you resist the urge to dictate outcomes, every time you release an attachment to what you cannot change, the mind becomes lighter. You feel an unfamiliar clarity, a sense that your inner space is expanding, making room for the life that exists rather than the life you wished would exist. This clarity is accompanied by a subtle power. It is not a power over others, nor over events, but a power over your own response. Viktor Frankl's insight emerges here with force. We may not control circumstances, but we always control the attitude with which we meet them. That control, quiet, steady, unshakable, becomes a source of strength you never recognized before. You are free, not because life bends to you, but because you no longer bend to life. Seneca's words resonate. It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor. In releasing your need to govern the uncontrollable, you step into abundance. Abundance not of possessions, not of accolades, but of peace, clarity, and presence. You notice how much lighter the mind feels, how much quieter the heart feels when it stops clinging to what does not belong to it. Your relationships begin to transform as well. You observe people without trying to shape them, without imposing expectations. You allow them the space to exist in their own way, just as you allow yourself to exist in yours. And in that space, a deeper kind of connection arises, rooted not in control, but in authenticity. The quality of your presence changes. Your words carry less force, yet more weight. Your silence feels safer, more intentional, more alive. And finally, you recognize a truth that Stoics have long taught. True power lies not in controlling the world, but in mastering the self. The energy once spent trying to orchestrate outcomes is now free. The tension that once lived in your shoulders dissolves. The anxiety that once clouded your mind begins to lift, and in its place grows something infinitely more valuable, an inner calm that is resilient, enduring, and unwavering. This is the first real taste of freedom, the realization that what you sought in control was never the source of your strength. True strength lies in acceptance, in clarity, in choosing to meet life with courage rather than resistance. And in that choice you find the peace that was always waiting quietly, patiently within you. With each passing day, the lesson begins to embed itself more firmly in your consciousness. Peace is not a reward for perfect circumstances, nor a gift granted when others behave as you wish. It is a practice, a discipline, a commitment to remain rooted in what belongs to you while letting the rest flow around you. You begin to recognize how much energy was wasted chasing control, chasing outcomes, people, reactions, events, when that energy could have been devoted to cultivating your own character, your own mind, your own resilience. Epictetus's words echo in this understanding. The things that are truly yours, your judgments, your decisions, your integrity, are untouched by the chaos of the world. Everything else is borrowed, temporary, beyond your command, and as you observe your previous attempts to seize what wasn't yours, you see them not as failures, but as lessons. Each act of striving against the uncontrollable becomes a marker on the path toward wisdom. You begin to appreciate the subtle beauty in life's impartiality. It does not conform to your desire, yet it unfolds perfectly when met with acceptance. Marcus Aurelius reminds us that nothing external can harm the soul unless it consents. With this realization, a new confidence grows within you, not the confidence of domination, but the quiet certainty of self-mastery. You understand that the world's unpredictability is not a threat, but a mirror, reflecting the degree to which your mind has been entangled in illusions of control. Each time you let go, each time you resist the impulse to interfere, the mirror becomes clearer, showing a mind unburdened and a spirit steady. The psychological effect is profound. Without the constant pressure of trying to manipulate outcomes, your mental space expands. Worries that once gnawed at your thoughts lose their grip. The imagined catastrophes that kept you awake begin to fade. You note how many sleepless nights were spent rehearsing scenarios that had no bearing on reality, and you feel a mixture of compassion and relief. Compassion for the part of yourself that tried so hard to protect, and relief that the mind now has permission to rest. Seneca wrote about the calm of the soul being disturbed not by events, but by opinion. As you live this truth, you see how your old narratives about fairness, about timing, about what others should have done, were the source of tension. Letting go of those narratives does not make you passive, it makes you lucid. Your perception becomes sharper, your responses more measured, your presence more profound. You discover that by relinquishing control over what isn't yours, you gain mastery over what truly matters. Viktor Frankl's insight resonates with new depth. The last of human freedoms is to choose one's attitude in any given circumstance. You begin to inhabit that freedom fully. In moments where anxiety once flared, you pause. You notice the urge to control and consciously decide to release it. In moments where fear of loss once clenched your chest, you breathe and observe. You understand that life is unfolding as it must, and your strength lies in how you meet it, not how you bend it. And so a transformation emerges, quiet, almost imperceptible at first. You are lighter, yet stronger, more present, yet more expansive, less consumed by the uncontrollable, yet more engaged with the moments that truly belong to you. The world continues in its way, unpredictable and impartial, but you no longer carry it on your shoulders. Instead, you stand grounded, serene, and awake. As the days pass, you notice a subtle but undeniable shift in how you perceive the world. Events that once triggered agitation now pass like clouds across the sky, visible, present, but not clinging, not heavy, not demanding a reaction. You begin to sense that the turbulence you experienced in life was never in the circumstances themselves, but in the tension you carried, the insistence that the world must align with your will. Every attempt to control what wasn't yours had quietly drained your vitality, leaving restlessness and fatigue in its wake. Epictetus taught that only by distinguishing between what is within our control and what is not can we achieve true freedom. And now, through lived experience, this wisdom begins to anchor itself in your soul. You see clearly that your judgments, intentions, and choices are the essence of your sovereignty, while the rest, the behavior of others, the shifting tides of circumstance, the unpredictability of outcomes, exists beyond your grasp. When you stop trying to seize it, you feel a liberation so profound that your mind almost pauses in gratitude for the simplicity of it. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that the universe moves according to its own law, and that clinging to expectations brings only suffering. You begin to notice how much energy was wasted attempting to enforce timelines, outcomes, and behaviors that were never yours to dictate. The realization is humbling but also empowering. By letting go of the illusion of control, you reclaim the energy that once fueled anxiety and redirect it toward presence, purpose, and conscious action. This shift does more than calm your mind. It changes the rhythm of your life. Without the constant tug of imagined futures, without the pressure to orchestrate outcomes, you begin to inhabit the present more fully. Every interaction, every moment, every thought carries a new clarity. You are no longer reacting reflexively to the unpredictable, you are engaging thoughtfully with what truly matters. Seneca's words resonate. Tranquility arises when the soul is unbound from the compulsion to possess or command what does not belong to it. Viktor Frankl's teaching becomes tangible. Freedom exists in the space between stimulus and response. You feel it in every breath. You feel it in the pause before you speak, in the silence before you act, in the calm observation of life, unfolding. That space, the choice to respond rather than to react, is the true measure of human autonomy. The world cannot take it from you. No circumstance, no person, no disappointment can reach it. In relationships, you observe a quiet transformation. You no longer try to shape others to meet your expectations, and in doing so, you encounter authenticity. People respond to presence, not pressure. And in allowing life to move without interference, you experience connection on a deeper level. A connection rooted not in control, but in acceptance. Your empathy deepens, your patience expands, and your influence grows quietly, without effort. The emotional weight you once carried begins to dissolve. The tension in your body eases, the racing of your mind slows, and the restlessness in your chest softens. You realize, with a calm astonishment, how much of your previous suffering was self-imposed, born from the desperate illusion that life could be held in your hands. Now, having released that illusion, a new steadiness fills the space once occupied by struggle. And in this steadiness, a truth becomes clear. Your peace is not dependent on the world conforming to your desires. It is rooted in your mind, your choices, and your acceptance. Life moves, people act, outcomes shift, but your inner calm remains intact, unshaken, resilient. The long journey of understanding what is yours and what is not culminates in this realization: freedom and peace were always waiting inside you, quietly, patiently, beneath the futile grasp of control. Over time, you begin to notice that life itself feels less like a series of obstacles and more like a continuous flow, an unfolding rhythm that no longer needs to be resisted. You start to see the subtle patterns that guide events, the quiet logic of circumstance that persists regardless of your desire to direct it. Where once there was frustration, now there is curiosity. Where once there was panic, now there is patience. You realize that your suffering was never required. It was optional, sustained only by the mind's insistence on control. Epictetus's teachings echo loudly in this space. He urged us to recognize that the boundary between what is ours and what is not is the foundation of tranquility. You begin to feel the truth of that boundary, sensing clearly what belongs to your will and what does not. Your choices, your actions, your values, these are yours. Everything else, the thoughts of others, the course of events, the randomness of fortune, does not belong to you. And in accepting that distinction, you uncover a freedom that feels almost sacred, a liberation not granted by external circumstances, but discovered within. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that events in the world are indifferent. They are neither inherently good nor bad. The suffering comes only from the stories we attach to them. Now, you see the profound accuracy of this observation. The arguments you once replayed, the disappointments you once ruminated over, the outcomes you desperately tried to manipulate, all of these were magnified by interpretation rather than reality. By releasing the need to control them, your mind finds space to rest, to breathe, and to observe life as it truly is. The psychological transformation is striking. Your anxiety, once constant and gnawing, begins to fade. You notice that fear of loss, fear of uncertainty, fear of rejection, these fears lose their potency when you stop investing them with your energy. Seneca said that the soul is disturbed not by things themselves, but by judgments about things. And now, with careful observation, you feel that disturbance lift as you stop imposing judgments on what is inherently beyond your control. Viktor Frankl's insight resonates with new clarity. Between stimulus and response lies choice. That choice, you realize, is the true seat of power. No one can touch it. No circumstance can diminish it. Each time you pause before reacting, each time you release the urge to manipulate outcomes, each time you let life flow without interference, you reclaim this power. And with it comes a profound serenity, a sense that your life is no longer being hijacked by uncontrollable forces. In your relationships, you notice a subtle but meaningful change. You stop pressing others to conform to your desires. You stop attempting to micromanage their thoughts, emotions, and decisions. And in this freedom, connection deepens. People respond naturally, authentically, without coercion. You find yourself listening more intently, observing more compassionately, and offering presence without expectation. Control no longer dictates your interactions, acceptance and understanding do. A steady calm begins to anchor your days. The tightness in your chest, the tension in your shoulders, the restless thoughts in your mind, all begin to soften. You recognize with quiet awe how much of your previous suffering was self-created, rooted in the futile desire to hold life in your hands. Letting go does not signify weakness, it signifies wisdom. It is the conscious acknowledgement that life, in its entirety, belongs to its own rhythm. And in this awareness, you feel a deep, unshakable peace emerging. Not a fragile peace dependent on outcomes, not a conditional calm tied to circumstance, but a robust, steady, enduring presence that resides fully within you. It is here that the Stoic promise becomes tangible. Freedom is not about changing the world, it is about mastering the mind, releasing what is not yours, and choosing to meet reality with courage, clarity, and calm. As you continue observing your inner life, a subtle revelation begins to emerge. Most of your previous struggles were fueled by a single unexamined habit, the need to control that which was never yours to govern. You recall moments when you tried to manipulate outcomes, shape decisions, or force others into alignment with your desires. At the time, it felt necessary, even urgent, yet, in retrospect, you see that this compulsion only created tension, anxiety, and disappointment. Your grip on the world was tight, but your hold on yourself was loose. Epictetus's wisdom becomes alive in these reflections. He taught that peace arises from distinguishing between what belongs to us and what does not. Now, for the first time, you feel the practical depth of this teaching. Your choices, your thoughts, your intentions, these are within your command. The rest, the behaviors of others, the unfolding of events, the whims of fortune, are not. Accepting this does not make you passive. It makes you wise. It gives you the clarity to focus your energy on what is meaningful and the courage to release what is futile. Marcus Aurelius observed that the mind often suffers more in anticipation than in reality. You recognize this truth vividly. How many sleepless nights were spent rehearsing outcomes that never occurred? How often did you relive conversations, trying to rewrite them in your imagination? How often did you feel tension, exhaustion, or dread over forces you could not control? By seeing the futility of these efforts, you begin to reclaim the mental space that fear and desire once occupied. The psychological impact of this understanding is profound. Anxiety, once a constant companion, begins to fade. You notice how your reactions have softened. You are less reactive, less impulsive, less consumed by imagined threats. Seneca's words resonate more deeply than ever. We suffer more often in imagination than in reality. Every time you release the urge to control, you reclaim freedom. Every time you let go of the need to dictate outcomes, you reclaim peace. Viktor Frankl's insight adds another layer. Between stimulus and response lies freedom. You begin to feel this freedom expanding within yourself. In situations that once provoked tension or irritation, you pause, you observe, you choose. And in that choice lies autonomy, strength, and clarity. No external event can strip this away. It belongs to you, untouchable and permanent. Your relationships shift in subtle but profound ways. You no longer feel the compulsion to shape others according to your expectations. You stop trying to manage their reactions, their decisions, or their emotions, and in this release you discover authenticity. Connections deepen not because you demand conformity, but because you offer acceptance. Your presence becomes more intentional, more grounded, more meaningful. A calm begins to settle in your body, your mind, and your heart. The tension in your shoulders eases. The restlessness in your thoughts slows. The fear that once pressed against your chest softens. You realize that much of your previous suffering was self-inflicted, born from the illusion that control equals safety. Letting go does not mean surrender. In your power, it means reclaiming it from the endless cycle of futile struggle. And in that reclaimed space, a new peace takes root, a peace that is quiet, resilient, and enduring. It is not dependent on outcomes, circumstances, or the behavior of others. It exists because you have chosen to meet life as it is, not as you wish it to be. In this choice you find the essence of Stoic freedom, the understanding that while the world moves according to its own law, your inner life remains sovereign, steady, and whole. As you live in this growing awareness, you notice the subtle power of perspective. Life itself does not bend to your preferences, yet your mind has the ability to shape how it is experienced. The storms that once felt overwhelming now appear as forces of nature, neither cruel nor personal, merely part of the rhythm that has always existed. You begin to understand that your suffering was never truly in the events themselves, but in the mind's insistence that they conform to your desires. The realization is liberating. Epictetus's teaching becomes tangible. The world contains countless things beyond your control, and the only source of true power lies in how you respond to them. Every attempt to dominate circumstances or other people, every effort to force outcomes, was an expenditure of energy that could have been devoted to mastering your own mind. Now that energy is reclaimed. It flows into conscious choices, into deliberate thoughts, into the cultivation of virtue and resilience. Your internal life becomes the canvas where peace and clarity are painted. Marcus Aurelius reflected on the impermanence of events and the impartiality of the universe. You begin to experience this truth not as a concept, but as a lived reality. The anxiety of unpredicted outcomes dissolves, replaced by a patient observation of life's unfolding. You no longer interpret change as threat. Instead, you see it as information, a natural movement that invites engagement rather than resistance. The mind, once caught in constant tension, begins to expand into the calm that comes from acceptance. Psychologically, this shift is profound. The relentless anticipation, the overthinking, the urge to correct or control, all of it loosens its grip. Seneca's words echo clearly, "No man is free who is not master of himself." By ceasing to wrestle with what is not yours, you reclaim freedom you may not have known was ever lost. Each moment of release builds strength. Each act of letting go reinforces resilience. Anxiety, once omnipresent, diminishes. Your heart begins to trust itself again. Viktor Frankl's insight into the space between stimulus and response now feels alive. That space, where choice resides, becomes a sanctuary. You feel it in your pause before reacting, in your calm observation of life unfolding, in your decision to act only where your influence truly matters. It is an internal sovereignty that no circumstance can shake. Nothing external can diminish it. It belongs wholly to you. Even your relationships shift subtly but significantly. You no longer feel compelled to manipulate, persuade, or control others to feel secure. By allowing people to exist freely, you encounter authenticity in connection. Interactions gain depth, trust deepens, and influence emerges naturally from presence rather than force. By releasing control over others, you strengthen your own ability to act with clarity and compassion. In this cultivated stillness, you experience the profound wisdom of the Stoics. The world is indifferent, your judgments are not. Peace is not a reward, it is a practice. Every day that you redirect attention toward what belongs to you, your mind, your choices, your responses, you solidify resilience, calm, and clarity. And why? This internal mastery comes a quiet joy, a deep satisfaction that the mind, finally untethered from what it cannot govern, has returned to its natural state of balance. And so, the transformation is both subtle and immense. By relinquishing control over what is not yours, you have discovered the essence of freedom. Life moves, events unfold, people act, and yet you remain anchored, unchallenged by the uncontrollable, unshaken by the unpredictable, fully present in the strength that belongs solely to you. As this inner mastery takes root, you start noticing how your perception of challenges changes. Situations that once felt urgent or threatening now arrive as neutral events, neither personal nor punitive. You realize that the tension you once carried was largely self-imposed, built from the belief that you must control outcomes to preserve your safety, your dignity, or your peace. And in seeing this, a quiet humility arises, a recognition that life, in its vast complexity, was never meant to be held tightly in your hands. Epictetus's principle becomes alive. Only what belongs to you can truly be owned. Your thoughts, your intentions, your decisions, these are sovereign. Everything else, the opinions, actions and reactions of others, the turning of events, the shifting circumstances, exists outside your jurisdiction. For years, you had invested your energy in what was never yours to hold, and now the weight of that realization is both sobering and liberating. The moment you release the illusion of control, your mind breathes, and the world feels less like a battlefield. Marcus Aurelius observed that we often suffer more in expectation than in reality. Reflecting on your own life, you see the accuracy of this. How many hours were spent rehearsing outcomes, imagining betrayals, predicting failures? How often did you replay interactions, trying to rewrite in your mind? That constant preoccupation with things beyond your control consumed mental energy, leaving little for what truly mattered: integrity, clarity, presence. Now, as you redirect your focus, you find that life is far more manageable and far more meaningful than it seemed in those anxious moments. The psychological impact of this shift is profound. Anxiety, once a constant undercurrent, begins to loosen. The tightness in your chest eases. Thoughts, once racing, now arrive and depart like passing clouds. Seneca's wisdom resonates clearly. We are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more in imagination than in reality. By surrendering the compulsion to control what is not yours, you reclaim your freedom, your focus, and your calm. Each act of release strengthens resilience, teaching the mind that peace does not depend on external circumstance. Viktor Frankl's insight becomes vivid. The space between stimulus and response is the seat of true freedom. You feel that space expanding within yourself. In moments that previously triggered irritation or fear, you pause, you observe. You choose your response rather than react automatically. That conscious choice, untouchable by others, unassailable by circumstance, is the ultimate expression of autonomy. Your inner life becomes a domain of stability that the world cannot disturb. Your relationships transform quietly but powerfully. By ceasing the need to manipulate or control, you allow authenticity to emerge. People reveal themselves fully, without coercion. Trust grows organically. Connection deepens, naturally. In this new way of being, your influence is no longer exerted through force or expectation, but through presence, empathy, and unwavering calm. And as this understanding sinks deeper, you recognize the final truth. The very act of releasing control over what is not yours does not diminish your power, it magnifies it. Strength now resides not in dominance, but in mastery of self. Freedom now exists not in the bending of the world to your will, but in the unshakable stillness of your mind. The chaos of life no longer robs you of serenity. Instead, you move through the world like a steady current, responsive, aware, unburdened, and profoundly at peace. As the days and weeks pass, a subtle transformation begins to reveal itself in the very rhythm of your life. You notice that moments that once carried anxiety or urgency now arrive with a quiet neutrality. Situations unfold, people act, and outcomes manifest, yet your mind no longer tenses in anticipation or resists what is happening. The realization settles gently but firmly. The turbulence you once experienced was never inherent in the events themselves. It existed in your insistence that life conform to your expectations. Epictetus's teaching resonates more deeply with each passing day. You are master only of your own mind, not of external events. Your thoughts, choices, intentions, and responses are the territories of your sovereignty. Everything else, the actions of others, the shifting currents of circumstance, the unpredictable outcomes of events, exists beyond your command. You begin to see the futility of past struggles, where you wasted energy trying to shape what was never yours, and with that recognition comes liberation. Marcus Aurelius reflected on the impermanence and impartiality of life, and now you understand it experientially. The world is neither hostile nor benevolent. It simply is. By removing the weight of expectation, you feel your mind expanding, more spacious, more awake. You realize that your suffering was often the product of imagined threats, rehearsed scenarios, and endless mental narratives that had no grounding in reality. Letting go of these narratives is not passivity, it is clarity. Psychologically, this release begins to reshape your inner landscape. The tension in your chest, the rapid thoughts, the gnawing anticipation, they all begin to loosen. Seneca's wisdom becomes tangible. We are often disturbed, not by events, but by the views we take of them. Your mind, once reactive and restless, becomes reflective and deliberate. You notice the freedom in responding rather than reacting, in observing rather than grasping. Each instance of surrendering control fortifies your inner stability. Viktor Frankl's insight, between stimulus and response lies freedom, becomes a lived reality. That space, once abstract, now feels like a tangible domain within you. You experience it when you pause before speaking, when you breathe. Instead of reacting, when you choose presence over panic. It is a quiet authority that the world cannot touch. An inner sovereignty immune to circumstance, rooted in the simple act of choosing your response consciously. Even your relationships transform. By letting go of the need to shape or manage others, you invite authenticity. People no longer exist as subjects to your control, but as fellow participants in life's unfolding. Connection deepens naturally. Trust grows organically. Influence emerges quietly, not through pressure, but through the calm, grounded presence you bring. And as this clarity and serenity deepen, a profound truth emerges. Peace is not a reward, nor is it dependent on the world behaving as you desire. True freedom is internal. It is cultivated by mastering what belongs to you and relinquishing what does not. The energy once devoted to control, worry, and resistance now flows into your own life, enriching your actions, fortifying your mind, and filling each moment with presence. Here, in this reclaimed inner domain, you experience the essence of Stoic mastery, a mind unshaken by circumstance, a heart unburdened by expectation, and a life lived fully in alignment with what is truly yours. The calm you sought was never lost. It was simply buried beneath the futile effort to control what could not be controlled. And now, with patience, reflection, and practice, it rises stead, illy, quietly, inevitably within you. As this inner calm becomes more familiar, you begin to notice a subtle yet profound shift in how life feels. Moments that once carried tension now arrive with quiet neutrality. Plans go awry, people act unpredictably, events unfold without your input, and yet the mind remains unshaken. You start to see the invisible thread that wove so much of your past suffering, the constant effort to control what was never yours. That grasping, that tension, that sense of urgency, once mistaken for responsibility, was in fact the thief of your peace. Epictetus's teaching resonates with renewed clarity. Freedom is found not in manipulating circumstances, but in mastering your response to them. You are sovereign over your judgments, intentions, and actions. Everything else, the decisions of others, the currents of fortune, the unpredictable turns of events, resides outside your command. Recognizing this boundary is not resignation, it is empowerment. It allows you to invest energy where it matters and release what never belonged to you in the first place. Marcus Aurelius's reflections come alive. The world is impartial, indifferent, neither kind nor cruel. Your suffering emerges from your expectations, from the stories you tell yourself about how things should unfold. By letting go of these narratives, you reclaim clarity. You no longer allow imagined threats, past grievances, or hypothetical failures to dictate your inner state. Each moment becomes lighter, more vivid, more accessible to thoughtful engagement rather than reactive panic. Psychologically, this shift transforms your inner landscape. The constant buzz of anxiety begins to dissolve. Seneca's insight becomes living truth. We are disturbed not by events but by our opinions about them. The tightness in your chest eases, the racing of thoughts slows, and a sense of spaciousness emerges. You realize that freedom resides not in shaping the world, but in shaping your mind. Each instance of letting go, each conscious release of control, strengthens the foundation of your inner life. Viktor Frankl's principle that between stimulus and response lies freedom takes tangible form. That space becomes a sanctuary. In moments where fear or irritation once surged, you pause, you observe, you choose. That conscious choice is your domain, untouchable by circumstance. Nothing external can penetrate it. Your responses are no longer automatic, they are deliberate, grounded, and aligned with your values. This is the essence of autonomy, the quiet power that the Stoics pursued above all else. Even your relationships begin to shift. By releasing the urge to manage or control, you invite authenticity. People are no longer extensions of your expectations, but full, autonomous beings. Connection deepens naturally. Trust grows quietly. Your influence emerges not through pressure or manipulation, but through grounded presence, empathy, and calm authority. You notice the paradox. By releasing control, you gain strength. By surrendering expectation, you invite genuine connection. And in this calm, a profound truth crystallizes. Peace is not contingent on circumstances. It does not depend on others, on fortune, or on outcomes aligning with your desires. True freedom is cultivated within through mastery of your mind and conscious release of what is not yours. Energy that was once wasted on tension and control now flows into purposeful action, deliberate thought and presence. The life that emerges from this clarity is steady, grounded, and filled with a quiet resilience that no external turbulence can disturb. In this way, the Stoic promise becomes lived reality. The world may move unpredictably, people may act beyond your influence, outcomes may surprise, but your inner life remains sovereign, calm, clear, and unshaken. The peace you sought was never lost. It was buried under the illusion of control, and now, through reflection, discipline, and patience, it rises steadily within you. And now, as you stand quietly in the stillness you have cultivated, a final truth settles deep within you. The world never owed you calm, nor did it promise outcomes aligned with your desires. What you once thought was control was, in reality, tension disguised as responsibility. By releasing the grip on what is not yours, by distinguishing between what you can govern and what you cannot, you have uncovered the essence of freedom. True peace was never in bending life to your will. It has always been within you, waiting for your recognition, waiting for your courage to let go. Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, and Seneca all remind us that tranquility is cultivated, not acquired. It arises from clarity, discipline, and a deep understanding of what belongs to us and what does not. You have learned that the mind is the ultimate frontier. The moment you stop attempting to control the uncontrollable, your energy is restored, your presence expands, and your life becomes a living expression of wisdom. Viktor Frankl's words echo here too. Freedom is always found in the space between stimulus and response. That space, now embraced, is your sanctuary, your authority, your power. Imagine the life you can build from this foundation, one where anxiety no longer dictates your choices, where fear does not dictate your actions, where the shifting moods of others or the unpredictability of events do not disturb the calm you carry within. You move through each day with intentionality, clarity, and presence. Your relationships thrive, not because you control them, but because you allow authenticity to flourish. Your mind, once burdened BBR, imagined responsibility for the uncontrollable, is now a sanctuary of focus, reflection, and serenity.br. And so, the journey comes full circle. You have learned, as the Stoics did, that peace is not found in external circumstance but in the mastery of the self. By relinquishing what is not yours, by meeting life as it is rather than as you wish it to be, you stand free. The chaos of the world no longer reaches the stillness of your mind. The storms may rage, outcomes may shift, and people may act unpredictably, but inside you remain unwavering. This is freedom. This is clarity. This is the quiet triumph of the human spirit over its illusions. If this message resonated, if you feel the value of reclaiming your peace and understanding the true power of letting go, make sure to subscribe to Stoicism Notebook. Here, we explore these life-changing truths, offering guidance to live but deeply, thoughtfully, and courageously. Leave a comment below, sharing your own reflections. What has helped you release control and find inner calm? Your experiences can inspire someone else on this journey. Remember, peace is your birthright, control is an illusion, and freedom resides in the mind that chooses wisely. Embrace it, live it, and let your inner life shine, unshaken by the storms around you.